could take this conversation about race and change and put it down in one particular place, and it doesn't have to be a particular city or borough in Delaware County, but for a group to look at it, where would you place it? Let me tell you where I would place it. I would probably place it on the corner of, say, I'm thinking somewhere where Providence Road meets Springfield meets Swarthmore. I would probably place it somewhere right out there by the Springfield Mall, because it's close enough to Swarthmore, Springfield, and folks from Chester know how to get there. I would plop it right there. Where would you place this conversation?
I would probably pick something closer to, say, Alden, something within you've got to get someplace near Colwyn, Collingdale, Yeadon, and some of those areas. You could do it in Eddystone, because it separates a couple of areas. I'm familiar with that whole southern swath because I ran for office there, but I'm familiar with it anyway. There are all along McDade or Chester Pike, there are areas where you could have real meaningful conversations. And it's not because I want to bring together highly disparate views, but you need to have different views on the subject. I think you're going to see more consistency in the Springfield area than you might prefer, in order to really bring out some of the concerns.
Where would you take this conversation, Nicole? Put us in a physical location, a street. Show us someplace visually where you would take this conversation.
I would take this conversation right to the media courthouse. Right, I would put a tent right there and have a conversation, because this year was literally the first year that an African-American woman or person sat on Delaware County Council. So my conversation would be held right outside of the courthouse, because it definitely deals a lot in education right down the street with the Rose Tree Media School District. And you look at the differences, economically, that whole State Street quarter compared to, Avenue of the States. Definitely in terms of justice and reform right at the media courthouse. And yeah, that's where my conversation would take place.
Stefan.
Wow. Those are two great places. And that's a question I would have never, I'm glad I was asked last, because I wouldn't have a first answer. So I'm just going to go way out on a limb and say Chadds Ford. There's some things going on in Chadds Ford that require this conversation to be had. Chadds Ford, I'm learning from a Chadds Fordian, if that's the correct term, that they've got some race issues out there that they would love to keep buried. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the black guy who got pulled over a few months ago by a state trooper.
At his own house.
Yeah, at his own house. I actually saw the video from the dash cam, which wasn't made too available. But I was more curious as to what happened as a result of that arrest. And the answer was nothing. The police officer was allowed to he was doing his job. But what's also interesting is that Chadds Ford used to be a part of Birmingham Township. They were one. So it was kind of right in the mix of a Chester County, Delaware County type of a place. They made a cut. But has anyone heard of Chadds Ford High? No, you haven't. I'm just going to answer that for you, because the high school that Chadds Ford students go to is all the way out in Unionville, Pennsylvania. It's a 14-mile drive away from Delaware County. A guy told me very specifically, he said, "Do you know why they only have $1 million homes in Chadds Ford?" I thought I'd have a smart answer, but I didn't. He said, because they only want $1 million homes in Chadds Ford. And they are very specific about making sure there's no affordable housing going into Chadds Ford, which would likely attract, more people of modest means and possibly Black people. They do not want any Blacks in their school district out there, for the simple reason of they do not want to lower their ranking as a school district. But that's very unlike old school Chadds Ford people. There was a Black community in Chadds Ford called Little Africa, believe it or not. And there's a lot of Black families that have history in Chadds Ford who are, no longer a part of that community. So there's a new wave of people who've come through that try to make that an enclave for just the rich, just the white, just the privileged. And there's a small group of people who are preparing to put a fight up to try to make that change. It would be interesting to plop it right there on Route 1.
You're taking it to Chadds Ford, huh, Stefan?
I'm taking it to Chadds Ford.
Okay, all right. Well, Steve, you are executive.
I'm not gonna claim to be an expert on Chadds Ford. I've had little dealings with that municipality, but and not to contest you, Stefan, I would never do that. Most the acquaintances and dealings I've had there have actually been with African Americans who either lived there or had associations there, or Caucasians that seem to me to be amenable to diversity. So maybe there's hope.
Mm-hmm.
So since you're there now, Steve, tell us, where would you take this conversation? You are the Chester Housing Authority Executive Director, but you have dealings with people all across Delaware County. Where would you take this soapbox that we're putting out? And
unfortunately, I spend pretty much all my time in Chester, and that's where I'm comfortable having this conversation. That's where I like to see it had. And you and I together, maybe you more than me, have been successful in bringing people from around the county or even further sometimes to Chester to engage with us. And I always have found those to be exciting and productive venues. And because, when I'm not in Chester, you have to hear you get all the commentary from other people about Chester, and they've hardly ever spent any time here, and it's not positive. But once you bring people here and they get engaged and involved in intelligent, productive discussion, things get changed in a heartbeat. So if race is the subject, I like to see the discussions take place in the pockets of the geography you're talking about, where the race that's really on most people's minds actually exists. So if that's not an interesting and surprise answer, sorry, but that's just me.
Building Community is a video series developed by the Chester Housing Authority at the outset of the COVID-19 outbreak. It is one of the numerous communication mechanisms initiated in order for the Chester Housing Authority to keep in contact with its residents, staff, and the general public during an extended time of isolation.